Hi, everybody. Welcome again to Ivy English. I'm Bruce.
I'm Angela.
And I'm Wesley.
Today we start a 2-day lesson, today being June 10th and tomorrow the 11th. The title of both lessons will be The History of Poker and Playing Cards.
好，我们的中文标题是你从未想过的扑克牌。
I'll read through today's material, and then we'll go back as we always do, sentence by sentence, and explain them to you. Card games and games of chance have been played all over the world for millennia by various civilizations. However, you don't have to travel very far back in time to learn about the origin of the modern game of poker. Poker is believed to have originated in New Orleans back in the early 1800s. The name may have come from the name of a French game, poch, but the game itself supposedly resembled a Persian game known as az-nas. Of course, no player today would recognize this earliest iteration of the game. Poker was originally played with a 20-card deck, and 4 players would bet on which hand they thought was most valuable. As the century progressed, poker moved up the Mississippi River, where it was played on steamboats. It spread to the Northeast and Midwest during and immediately after the Civil War. In the latter half of the 19th century, poker made its way out west, thanks to the movement of pioneers and gold miners. It was during this period that poker became connected to the Wild West, gambling saloons, and violence. While the game of poker was making its way around North America, the rules were also evolving. Players began using a 52-card deck in the mid-1800s, and new hand rankings emerged. The flush, 5 cards of a single suit, was added, followed by the straight, 5 cards in sequential order. Various versions of poker also started to pop up. Stud poker emerged in California, and eventually this would evolve into the game known as Texas Hold'em in the early 20th century. If you are very familiar with poker now, it is likely due to the establishment of the World Series of Poker in the 1970s, the rise of online poker, and some dramatic million-dollar wins by unknown players at televised tournaments in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it's interesting. In Taiwan, I've noticed that people here ESL speakers tend to refer to playing cards as poker. They're like, get out the poker. I'm like, the poker cards? And they're like, yes. I'm like, oh, these are just called playing cards. We don't play poker with them always. They're not just only for poker. They're playing cards. You can play a lot of games with them.
Bridge.
像桥牌没错，所以各位要注意一点，就我们中文常常讲说扑克牌那有的人就觉得扑克牌那英文应该就是 poker cards 其实不对因为在英文里面呢那个东西叫做 playing cards 就 playing cards 那个是纸牌因为它的这个 playing cards 它可以用来打扑克牌，也可以用来打桥牌，还可以做其他的事情所以不一定是用来打扑克的。那所以是 playing cards， 那要注意那个重音在前面是 playing cards。你如果讲说 playing cards 的话，是在玩耍的纸牌那意思完全不一样所以大家记得扑克牌的英文不是 poker cards 是 playing cards。
Now, card games and games of chance have been played all over the world for millennia by various civilizations. Card games and games of chance are 2 different kinds of games. Card games could just be like, Crazy Eights or Uno. You're not taking a chance or gambling on them. But games of chance don't necessarily use cards. For instance, in casinos, there's the roulette wheel and all of those things where you dice, that sort of thing. So games of chance are gambling games and card games are games played with cards. And both of these kinds of games have been played all over the world for millennia, for thousands of years by everybody, by various civilizations.
好，所以这一开始他讲这个 card games 就是用纸牌玩的游戏 那不一定是跟赌博有关系，或者跟几率不一定有关系。但是呢，接下来我们看到这个 games of chance， 那又是另外不同的东西。games of chance 就是机会游戏，也就是说这个游戏有牵涉到一些机会的问题，跟运气有关。那事实上 games of chance 可以用纸牌来玩，但是也不一定用纸牌，你可能用骰子啊、掷骰子，那个都是games of chance 之一。那这个地方它如果说都是用纸牌来讲的话，就是说 card game 就专门讲用纸牌玩的游戏，那 games of chance 就是用纸牌来玩一些有几率在里面的、有运气在里面的这样的一种游戏。例如说你如果打扑克牌的话，你可能你拿到的牌会决定你赢的机会，这叫这个 chance， 所以 games of chance。 所以这两种东西呢 have been played， 被玩，大家玩这两种东西呢 all over the world， 全世界都在玩，而且是玩了多久呢？数千年然后呢，谁来玩呢？ by various civilizations， 有不同的文明、不同的文化都会玩这个 card games， 也会玩这些 games of chance， 跟机会有关的游戏那这个 civilizations 加了 s 表示不同的文明、不同的文化。
However, you don't have to travel very far back in time, and the reason this was written is, remember, games of chance and games played with cards were played for millennia, for thousands of years, however, you don't have to travel very far back in time to learn about the origin of the modern game of poker. So we learn from this sentence that poker is not one of those ancient games played by various civilizations around the world, and we'll be told before the bottom of the page exactly how it began.
好，那我们这里讲到说，虽然说纸牌啊这种东西呢，或者是这种机会游戏，人们已经玩了数千年了，但是呢 ，you don't have to travel very far， 就是你不用跑太远。那在哪里不用跑？在什么地方不用跑太远呢？ In time， 在时间上面不用跑太远，而且是往回跑 back。好 ，back in time， 也就是说，我们不需要回到很久远的过去英文就可以这样讲 ，you don't have to travel very far back in time 那不用回到很久远的过去做什么呢？才能够说 learn learn about 就是了解或者知道知道某件事情，了解什么事情。那在这里了解的事情是什么？是 the origin of， 就是这个起源什么的起源呢？ The modern game of poker， 就是现代扑克牌游戏的起源也就是说，虽然大家玩了几千年了，但是如果你要了解现代扑克牌的起源的话呢，其实你不需要回到很久远的过去。
Poker is believed to have originated in New Orleans back in the early 1800s. New Orleans is at the mouth of the Mississippi River where it goes into the Gulf.
好，所以呢就是这个纽奥良所以 poker is believed to 就是据信大家认为是这样子to have originated 是发源在哪里？那这个地方用 have originated， 因为这个是从 is 这个时间点，从现在来看呢，它是在过去发生完成的一件事情，所以是 have originated 所以大家认为它是在哪里发源呢？在纽奥良那这个 back 跟上一段最后一句那个 back in time 那个 back 是一样的，所以就是时间往回算那什么时候发明的呢？是在纽奥良，然后在这个1800年代，也就是19世纪的这个早期 early 1800s。
New Orleans history is interesting because they were the only city in the United States or in the New World that was founded by the French. There was other cities founded by the Spanish and by the British and other people, but New Orleans was founded by the French. And the culture, the people there combined with local Native American tribes to form a kind of very interesting beginning culture to this city. And so it's very different from all other American cities.
那纽奥良在美国是一个很特别的一个城市因为它是美国唯一一个由法国人所建立的城市，而且一开始建立的时候呢，当地还有一些原住民，所以它有原住民的文化，有法国的文化所以各位如果到纽奥良去的话呢，你会发现那个地方跟其他的美国城市很不一样By the way, do you say New Orleans or New Orleans?
都有。
There's a lot of ways of saying it.
Okay,
And then hardcore people are saying you're supposed to say New Orleans, which, whatever. If you're from New Orleans, you probably have a different way of pronouncing it than the rest of the world. People like to use pronunciation of city names to indicate possession,
That's why I've heard different versions.
New York.
Yeah.
Someone from New York says that.
I'm from Milwaukee, and I don't say it like you're supposed to say it anymore. I once said to a group of Wisconsinites, I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and they're like, no, you're not. I'm like, no, I can say it right. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They're like, too late.
所以这个每一个城市的来的人，他们对他们自己城市的这个发音方法都有一些很特色，别的地方的人可能一听都听出来了。
Anyways, there's a lot of ways of saying New Orleans. There's no really wrong way.
Okay.
I mean, if you're not from there.
Okay.
All right. The next sentence, the name may have come from the name of a French game, poch, but the game itself supposedly resembled a Persian game known as asnas. Excuse my Persian and French. We can leave that. Now, Persia today is called Iran, and the Persian Empire was quite a great one before in BC years, before the year 0. And it is related to the European languages. It's an Indo-European language, although it's right in the middle of Arabic and other non-European language areas. Anyway, this French game seems to be the source of the modern English word poker.
好，所以扑克牌这个 poker 这个名字呢 may have 这表示一种推测根据现有的证据我们推测它应该是来自于这个法国的这个一个游戏the name of a French game 那有法文放在这边但是 the game itself 这个游戏的本身 itself 在这里就指本身的意思supposedly 就是据推测据称大家认为是这样那这个游戏的本身呢大家认为是怎么样resembled 就是和什么什么相像look or seem alike 所以游戏名字是来自于法文但是呢这个游戏的本身却跟什么相像呢跟一个这个波斯的游戏known as 波斯被称为 asnas 这样的一个游戏那个内容是像这样的波斯游戏那名字是来自于法文
Of course, no player today would recognize this earliest iteration of the game. Iteration is a great word. It means version.
所以 iteration 就是 a form 或者 a version of something 例如说这个你说这个手机最新的那个版本呢你可以说 the latest iteration of an app 或者 of the app 好那所以这个当然今天呢大概没有一个打牌的人会 recognize 会认得这个游戏最早的那个版本所以大家就告诉你就这个现在其实中间有很多的演化了
So, poker was originally played with a 20-card deck, not like the deck today, and 4 players would bet on which hand they thought was most valuable. That has nothing to do with the modern game of poker at all.
所以 poker 它 originally 原本它是用什么来玩呢 was played with 是20张牌的一副牌 deck 在这里指一副牌它一副牌只有20张然后呢有4个这个人玩4 players 那这4个人呢他会 bet 会打赌on which hand they thought was most valuable 他们就可以打赌说谁手上的牌呢最有价值那这个 hand 就是手上的牌我们常常讲这一手好牌那个一手好牌中文也会用手这个字来表示你手上拿的那一些牌所以其实就是 the cards held in a card game 那是这个 by a given player 而且是通常是 at any time 所以就是你手上的牌
It really seems like a game merchants would play. You're betting on lots of goods, really.
Yeah, 这很像商人在玩的一种游戏，一种牌戏。
As the century progressed, poker moved up the Mississippi River because New Orleans is at the mouth of it, and the Mississippi River is like a giant highway of trade for much of its career. And so at the time, boats run on steam, giant paddle boats that were immortalized in Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah.
These were traveling up and down the Mississippi. And people, when you're spending time on boats, you need to do something. And so poker games are a great thing to do. And so it was played on steamboats. And steamboats became known as kind of havens of gambling and sort of disreputable and things like this.
好，所以呢，这个to go forward in time 就是 progress 的意思，就是往前推进所以随着这个时间随着这个世纪往前推进随着时间演进呢那扑克牌它就 这个沿着密西西比河往上，就往密西西比河的上游发展的。那在哪里玩呢？在密西西比河上的这个 steamboats 就是汽船，这个在河上密西西比河上的汽船。那 steamboats 在这个什么汤姆游览记啊，什么哈克历险记啊里面很重要的一个这个场景就是 steamboats。那各位如果要看什么样子的话，你去 Google 一下，照片就出来了。
It, that is the game of poker, spread to the northeast. You go up the Mississippi and then turn right on the Ohio River, and you will get towards the northeast. And Midwest, where the Mississippi River begins, is in Minnesota, which is very much next to Wisconsin. These are very, very Midwestern states. During and immediately after the Civil War, when the North and South had direct and very unfortunate contact.
好，所以 it spread to 就是它扩散到那个 the northeast 就是这个东北部，好，或者还有这个 Midwest 或者是中西部。那 during 就在这段期间，而且是 immediately after 是这段期间，什么期间？就在内战期间。还有呢 immediately after 就是内战之后那一段期间。
Now, in the latter half of the 19th century, poker made its way out west thanks to the movement of pioneers and gold miners.
好，所以呢，这个在19世纪的后半期啊，那他刚刚我们在第二段讲到，他们开始的时候是19世纪初期啊，但是到了19世纪的后半期呢，好，他怎么样呢？他就这个 made its way， 那就是到了哪里或者往哪里传了，那 out 就是远离，也就是往哪边去了，到 west， 因为西边那个美国西部那个时候对他们来讲还是很远的一个地方，所以扑克牌的游戏就传到了西部。Thanks to 就是因为多亏了 the movement of 多亏了什么东西的这个移动呢 ？Pioneers 拓荒者，还有 gold miners 这个金矿矿工他们往西边去了，那扑克牌就他们带到西边去了。
It was during this period, the second half of the 19th century, that poker became connected to the Wild West, gambling saloons. Saloon is a word for bar, and violence, because the picture we have of cowboys playing poker and drinking themselves silly with their guns on the table. This was the Wild West.
所以 it was during this period， 就在这段期间呢，好，怎么样 ？Poker became 变成了 connected to， 就是 be associated with 的意思，也就是它跟什么东西连在一起呢？跟 the Wild West 就是西部的这个蛮荒连在一起的。然后呢，还有跟什么连在一起呢？这 gambling saloons saloons 就是一个酒馆所以 gambling 就赌博，大家在用来赌博的一个酒馆同时它也跟暴力连在一起。
As is normal.
Yeah， 那个赌博大概跟暴力很容易就连在一起的。
Now, while the game of poker was making its way around North America, sort of becoming our national game in a way, the rules were also evolving. To evolve means to change and grow.
好，所以当这个扑克牌这个游戏呢 was making its way around， 就是四处传在北美四处传的时候呢，它的游戏规则也 were also evolving， 它也在开始进展演化当中。evolve 就是进展或者演化。
Players began using a 52-card deck, not the old 20-card deck, in the mid-1800s, and new hand rankings emerged. Ranking is how much or how good something is, and then what's next until you go to the bottom.
好，所以 ranking 其实就是排序，谁比较大谁比较小，因为扑克牌里面有比较大的牌有比较小的牌嘛，所以这个句子就是说，这些打牌的人呢，开始使用的是52张牌的 deck 的一副牌有52张，这个是在19世纪中期的时候。然后呢，新的这个 hand rankings， 这个 hand rankings， 这个 ranking 在这里其实它也可以指这个不同的排序你的一手牌上不同的排序或者一种牌型的组合emerged 就出现了。
The flush, which is 5 cards of a single suit, a suit being, of course, diamonds, hearts, clubs, and spades. The idea of having 5 cards of one single suit being an important set, this idea was added. And then it was followed by the straight, which is 5 cards, I'm thinking of any suit, in sequential order,
correct.
meaning 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Well, if they're in the same suit, it's a straight flush.
Right. Now I know that term, finally.
好，所以呢，这个地方我们看到几个这个扑克牌的名词哈。第一个 ，the flush，the flush 其实指的就是同花哈，就是你有他这里讲到说 five cards of a single suit 指的就是牌的花色啊，包括 clubs、diamonds、heart、spades 这个是花色，所以你同一个花色呢，你有5张牌的话，那就称为同花，就是 flush。好，那如果说followed by 就这样的一种玩法 was added， 大家增加了这种玩法。好，那还有呢 followed by the straight straight 是顺子什么叫顺子？顺子就是说这5张牌，而且是 in sequential order， 这5张牌它的这个数字呢是按照顺序的，这样就是顺子那如果说你今天是同花色而且有顺子的话，我们叫同花顺，那叫做 straight flush 所以这样子玩这种玩法就新加进来了。
Various versions of poker also started to pop up. Different ways to play the game of poker. You could invent your own style of poker if you liked. If other people also enjoyed that style or version, then it became very popular in many places.
没错哈，所以接下来呢 various 不同的 versions of poker 不同的这个扑克牌的玩法或者不同的版本呢也开始 pop up 就是冒出来了。
The next sentence continues on from the previous, giving some examples. So stud poker emerged in California. So California was where stud poker showed up. And eventually, over time, this would evolve, change, and grow into the game known as Texas Hold'em in the early 20th century. And now Texas Hold'em is like a staple of internet online poker gambling.
好，所以呢 stud poker 叫做梭哈扑克，它的意思就是说你手上的牌有一张面是朝下的，那其他的牌呢都会这个亮出来进行赌博stud poker， 那它是在加州开始出现的然后呢 eventually 慢慢的最后呢就是这样的这个梭哈扑克呢会 evolve into 会演化成为一种游戏的 game， 这游戏 known as 大家称为德州扑克。那德州扑克其实就是说每一个这个玩家呢他也是一样有正面朝下的牌，那还有正面朝上的公共牌一种玩法这是20世纪初年初期发展出的那种玩法。那这刚刚 Angel 老师讲说现在这个线上扑克呢这个很多人玩的就是德州扑克。
By the way, Hold'em is short for them. To hold them, when you say it quickly, it's Hold'em.
好，所以这个 hold them 讲快就变成 hold them 那听说这个德州扑克就是你看谁能够撑到最后这个那就赢了 yeah.
If you are very familiar with poker now, it is likely due to the establishment of the World Series of Poker in the 1970s. That's one place you may have caught on to poker. Also, the rise of online poker, because it's played on the computer a lot, and some dramatic $1 million wins by unknown players at televised tournaments. A tournament is a large contest, and if it's televised, of course, it's on television. In the early 2000s, I never saw those programs, but I can imagine how exciting they tried to make the game look.
Yeah， 好，所以呢，你如果非常你现在如果已经很熟悉扑克牌的话呢，那有可能是 due to 因为 the establishment 因为什么东西的创立呢？因为这个世界扑克大赛的创立，这是在1970年代的。好，同时也可能是因为 the rise of online poker 或者是线上扑克的兴起。好，这个 rise 在这里就是兴起的意思。那也有可能是因为有一些 dramatic 就是很戏剧化的很引人注目的这种$1 million wins wins 在这里指这个赢得的奖金或者是你赢得的胜利，所以你曾经也许看到过有人这个赢了像很戏剧化的赢了100万美元谁赢呢？一些不知名的这个玩牌的人unknown players， 而且在哪里赢呢？在 televised tournaments tournaments 就锦标赛，那 televised 就是电视转播的，那因为电视转播所以大家都看得到，那看到他哇他怎么赢这么多钱那这个尤其是在这个21世纪初期的时候你会看到这些东西，那因为这些东西你可能对扑克牌非常熟悉。
Okay, that's it for today's lesson, but remember, we'll be back tomorrow with part 2 Join us again tomorrow, please. Until then,
Bye-bye.